Hi guys, welcome to Animal Encounters. Alright, today I'm covering the most reckless shark deaths ever recorded.
From a man who grabbed a wild bull shark by the fin just to impress his 1,000 followers, to a 15-year diving veteran who pushed for one last descent and never came back up. But first, we start in South Africa, where a mother swam out alone and never made it back to shore. It was January 12th, 2018, in Mossel Bay, South Africa. The weather was warm, and the beach was crowded with families enjoying the summer afternoon. Several seals had been seen around the offshore rocks throughout the day, and local fishermen had recently reported large schools of bait fish moving close to shore. At the time, none of it seemed unusual enough to keep people out of the water. That's where Nessa Geyer was. 36 years old, an elementary school teacher, married, and a mother of quadruplets. 4 kids.
Let me just sit with that for a second, because anyone raising 4 children at once already has my full respect.
Her friends always described her the same way: organized, patient, endlessly devoted to those kids. This trip mattered. It was the family's annual summer getaway, but the first real one since the children had started school. You can picture how much planning went into it. Nessa spent most of that afternoon down in the shallow water, helping her kids splash and play while her husband kept watch near the shore. Here's the part the family couldn't have known. Throughout the week, some local fishermen had mentioned unusually large concentrations of bait fish gathering close to shore. The seals around the offshore rocks had been unusually active as well. Nothing about the conditions was considered dangerous enough to close the beach, and no shark warning had been issued that afternoon. But as the tide pushed in, the water gradually became murkier, turning from clear blue to a cloudy gray. After hours of chasing 4 energetic children around the beach, Nessa decided to take a short swim farther out for a few quiet minutes to herself, just beyond where most swimmers stayed. I think most of us would have done the same. A few peaceful minutes after wrangling 4 kids all day sounds earned.
Now let me tell you about the animal that patrols these waters. The great white shark, up to 16 feet long, built like a torpedo, and equipped with senses that can detect tiny electrical signals, vibrations, and chemical traces in the water.
In areas where seals and baitfish are concentrated, murky water can make it harder for a shark to identify exactly what it's approaching. Fast-moving shadows, splashing at the surface, and low visibility can sometimes create the conditions for a mistaken investigative bite, especially in feeding areas where prey is abundant. And that afternoon, several risk factors happened to overlap at the same time. Nessa had drifted roughly 80 yards offshore, beyond the main swimming area, and in water too deep to stand. A large school of baitfish suddenly scattered across the surface nearby. A few swimmers noticed the disturbance but paid little attention. Fish often moved unpredictably around the beach. Moments later, a great white moved in from deeper water beyond the swimming area. Nessa was facing the shore. She never saw it. The shark appeared to approach from below and behind, a common hunting angle for great whites. In an instant, it surged upward and struck. The bite tore into her lower torso and upper leg, causing catastrophic injuries and severing major blood vessels in her pelvis and upper leg. Witnesses later described the water erupting around her before screams echoed across the beach. Then, almost as quickly as it appeared, the shark released and disappeared back into deeper water. Panic swept through the swimming area. Parents rushed into the shallows to grab their children. Swimmers scrambled for shore. Lifeguards launched rescue boards and paddled hard toward her position, reaching her within minutes. But the injuries were catastrophic.
Despite the speed of the response, there was nothing rescuers could do. Nessa succumbed to her injuries before she could be brought back safely to the beach.
Authorities closed the beach while officials reviewed witness statements, ocean conditions, and reports of increased marine activity in the area. Investigators ultimately classified the incident as a tragic, unprovoked shark attack. There had been no warnings, no reckless behavior, and no obvious mistake. Just a swimmer who happened to be in the wrong place during a brief feeding period that nobody fully recognized at the time. And the detail that stays with me most is that her husband was standing right there on the shore, watching the water, never imagining that an ordinary family beach day would end that way. Nessa's family did everything people normally do on a beach day, and tragedy still found them. The next story is different because the danger comes after someone decides getting closer is worth the risk. It was August 22nd, 2020, in Playa del Carmen, Mexico. The water was clear, the weather was calm, and conditions were ideal for diving. A group of tourists had gathered for a professional shark diving excursion, hoping to get close-up footage of one of the ocean's most powerful predators. Among them was a 28-year-old named Ryan Benedict. Ryan worked part-time in digital marketing and ran a handful of small social media pages built around travel and adventure. About 5,000 followers. Enough to taste success, not enough to make a living from it. And if you've spent any time online, you know the type.
He was always chasing the next bigger, riskier clip, constantly complaining that ordinary footage didn't get attention anymore.
And I'll be honest with you, that mindset scares me more than any shark. Because once normal stops feeling good enough, people start taking risks they never would have considered before. So, Ryan flew to Mexico with 2 friends for one reason: to make videos. They booked a professional shark diving excursion run by an experienced crew. Before anyone entered the water, the guides gave a safety briefing. The rules were simple. Do not touch the sharks. Do not chase them. Do not interfere with them in any way. For a while, everything went exactly as planned. Ryan captured incredible footage. Large sharks passing within a few feet of him, shots most people would have been thrilled to take home. But Ryan wasn't satisfied. He kept trying to get closer, convinced the footage still wasn't dramatic enough.
The bull shark is one of the most powerful sharks in the ocean. Stocky, heavy built, and capable of thriving in both saltwater and freshwater.
It is a highly adaptable predator found in coastal shallows, estuaries, and river systems around the world. They have thick bodies, powerful jaws, and can cause catastrophic injuries with a single bite. They're not mindless killers, but they are wild predators that rely on instinct when they perceive a threat or disturbance. When confined, stressed, or suddenly handled, a bull shark may react defensively with remarkable speed and force. When someone suddenly grabs or interferes with them, their reaction can be fast and violent. Several bull sharks were calmly circling below the group when a particularly large one passed beneath Ryan. Instead of letting it continue on its way, Ryan kicked downward and managed to catch hold of its dorsal fin. The entire thing happened in seconds, far too quickly for the guides to intervene before he made contact. The reaction was immediate. The shark twisted violently, trying to break free. Ryan had no chance of controlling an animal that size. The force spun him sideways through the water. As the shark turned, his leg swung directly into its path. The shark bit down hard on his upper thigh before releasing him and darting away. The damage was severe. The bite appeared to sever or severely damage the femoral artery, resulting in catastrophic blood loss. Blood immediately poured into the water around him. Divers nearby quickly realized how serious the injury was. Safety divers moved toward Ryan and helped guide him back toward the boat. Crew members pulled him aboard and immediately began emergency first aid. They applied direct pressure to the wound and worked desperately to slow the bleeding. But the injury was catastrophic. The boat was still offshore, and advanced medical care was not immediately available. Despite emergency treatment from the crew, the catastrophic blood loss proved too severe. He died before reaching advanced medical care. In the aftermath, authorities reviewed the dive operation. Investigators found that the crew had followed standard procedures. The safety briefing had been given. Ryan had ignored those instructions and deliberately interfered with a wild animal. News of the incident spread quickly online. The very thing Ryan had spent years chasing, except not in the way he imagined. Public reaction was split between sympathy for his family and frustration over the decision that led to the attack.
And maybe that's the saddest part of all, that a man so determined to create a viral moment ended up being remembered for a mistake that lasted only a few seconds.
Within diving circles, the story became a reminder that wild animals are never completely predictable. The sharks had shown no signs of aggression before the incident. Everything changed the moment one of them was grabbed. For me, that's the detail that matters most here. Because the shark didn't attack out of nowhere. It reacted to something a human chose to do. One bad decision, made in seconds, ended a trip that should have been routine. Ryan entered the water hoping to force an unforgettable moment. Instead, he learned the same lesson countless people have learned before him. Wild animals do not follow human plans, and sometimes a single reckless decision is all it takes for an ordinary day to become your last. Ion's story begins with another diver who couldn't resist moving a little closer. It was April 17th, 2019, off the coast of Palm Beach Inlet, Florida, where the offshore water runs clear and deep blue. The kind of place dive boats motor out to every single day without a second thought. The sun was up, the surface was calm, and a few miles from shore, a group of tourists was gearing up for something they'd remember for the rest of their lives. Among them was a 42-year-old named Ion Ridge. Ian worked as a sales manager and was down in Florida visiting relatives. He was the type who liked to capture everything, always with an action camera in hand. The guy determined to bring home footage that would make everyone back home jealous. So when the chance came to book a shark diving excursion, he jumped on it. Before the group ever hit the water, the guides ran through a thorough safety briefing. The instructions were direct, and they were repeated more than once. Don't touch the sharks! Don't block their path! Keep your distance and let them move freely. Simple enough. But almost from the start, Ian was pushing it. He spent the trip angling for dramatic close-ups, edging nearer every time a shark drifted by.
And I'll tell you something. In my experience, the people who treat a safety briefing like a background noise are often the ones who end up learning the hard way.
The other participants had already gotten their shots and settled into a safer spot to just watch. Ian kept creeping closer. Now let me tell you about the animal sharing that water. The bull shark. Thick-bodied, powerful, and heavily built. They've got one of the highest bite forces ever recorded among sharks, and they're known for being bold and unpredictable. Bull sharks often pass divers without incident, but that's exactly why guides stress keeping a respectful distance. The area around a shark's head and gills is especially sensitive, and experienced divers know not to reach toward it. A shark that feels startled, cornered, or interfered with can react in an instant. That's exactly the mistake Ian made. The group dropped into the clear offshore water under the guide's watch, and a large bull shark began a slow approach. Shortly before the encounter, the guide signaled for Ian to return to the group's position, but he kept edging forward for a closer shot. Instead of holding his place, he drifted directly into the shark's path, camera rolling. As the shark passed, he extended his arm toward its head, his hand moving dangerously close to the area behind the gills. The shark reacted instantly. It turned and lunged, biting deep into his shoulder and upper chest. The force knocked him backward through the water. The bite tore through muscle and major blood vessels, causing catastrophic injuries. Almost immediately, a dark cloud of blood spread around him. The guides reacted fast, swimming to him, securing his body, and moving him back toward the vessel.
The shark, for its part, simply moved away and never returned. It wasn't hunting him. It had reacted to something that got too close.
But they were several miles offshore, and that distance became the cruelest part of the whole ordeal. Ian kept losing blood during the trip back. Despite the emergency treatment applied on board, his condition worsened as his body slipped into shock. Every minute mattered, and there simply wasn't enough time. He died before the boat could reach definitive medical care on land. Authorities reviewed the dive operation, examining the briefing, the conditions, and witness statements from everyone involved. Investigators found no evidence that the operator had ignored safety procedures. Accounts from guides and other divers consistently indicated that Ian had moved closer to the shark despite being signaled to maintain distance. What gets me is that he already had the footage he wanted, the safe footage, before any of this happened. He just couldn't resist reaching for a little more. What stays with me about Ian is how quickly a routine encounter turned serious once he crossed a line he didn't need to cross. Ethan's story starts with a father enjoying what should have been an ordinary afternoon with his children. It was August 11th, 2016, on a barrier island along the coast of North Carolina. The tide was out, the weather was warm, and families were spread across the beach enjoying the last weeks of summer. At low tide, a sandbar just offshore could be reached by walking through shallow water, and that afternoon, a 39-year-old construction supervisor named Ethan Craig headed out there with his 2 young sons. Ethan loved spending time outdoors with his family. Every summer they made a trip to the coast, and this day seemed no different from dozens of others. He and the boys spent hours exploring the sandbar, picking up shells and watching small crabs scurry across the wet sand.
And I get it, because those simple afternoons with your kids are usually the moments you remember most.
The problem was that they stayed longer than they intended. While they were focused on what was happening around them, the ocean was changing. The tide had begun to rise. The shallow route they had walked across earlier was slowly turning into a deeper channel with a stronger current. Ethan's sons noticed the water pulling harder at their legs as they started heading back. Ethan saw it too, but believed they still had enough time to cross safely. That decision would prove fatal. The waters around North Carolina's barrier islands are home to several large shark species. During the summer months, sharks often move close to shore while following schools of bait fish. In cloudy water and strong currents, visibility can be poor, creating conditions where a shark may mistake a person for natural prey. None of that is unusual. Sharks and people share these waters every year, often without either side even knowing the other is there.
By the time Ethan decided it was time to leave the sandbar, the channel separating it from the beach had deepened.
What had been an easy walk a few hours earlier now required swimming through moving water. The deeper channel concentrated bait fish and left Ethan farther offshore than most beachgoers. He told his sons to swim ahead while he stayed behind them. Both boys managed to reach shallower water closer to shore. Ethan remained in the deeper section of the channel, working against the current. Then something struck him. People on the beach saw sudden splashing and heard shouting from the water. At first, many assumed he was struggling against the current, but within moments it became clear something far more serious had happened. Ethan suffered a severe bite to his leg, causing catastrophic injuries and massive blood loss. Despite being badly hurt, he tried to keep moving toward shore. Witnesses later recalled seeing him fighting to stay afloat as others pointed toward the channel and called for help. The entire incident unfolded in a matter of seconds. Beachgoers and emergency responders rushed into the water to reach him. The current made the rescue difficult, and precious seconds slipped away as they fought to bring him back. By the time Ethan was pulled from the channel, he had become unresponsive. Rescue crews immediately began life-saving efforts, but the injuries were too severe. He was pronounced dead shortly afterward. Investigators later reviewed the conditions present that afternoon, including the incoming tide, witness accounts, and environmental factors around the sandbar. The shark involved was never positively identified, though experts noted that the shallow coastal waters and local shark populations made several species possible. The tragedy left the community shaken. There had been no reckless stunt, no attempt to provoke wildlife, and no obvious warning that danger was moments away. A father had simply misjudged how quickly the conditions offshore would change and found himself in deeper water at the worst possible time. His final decision had been to send his sons ahead while he remained behind. Both boys reached safety.
That detail always sticks with me, because even in the middle of a crisis, his focus was making sure his children got out first.
Ethan was taken by a combination of timing, circumstance, and a predator moving through the same stretch of water. It was the kind of tragedy that reminds people how quickly familiar conditions can change. A place that felt completely safe just an hour earlier became the setting for a fatal encounter no one could have predicted. Ethan wasn't chasing danger at all. He simply found himself in the wrong place at the wrong moment. Up next is someone with years of experience who knew exactly what risks existed offshore. It was September 30th, 2019, off the coast of Key West, Florida. The water was calm, visibility was excellent, and a line of floating debris a few miles offshore had attracted schools of mahi-mahi. Out there that morning was 33-year-old Ravi Drum, a commercial electrician who spent most weekends spearfishing with two longtime friends. Ravi wasn't new to the sport. He had years of experience chasing pelagic fish offshore and used equipment far more advanced than what most recreational divers carried. His friends trusted his judgment completely. He understood the risks that came with blue water spearfishing and regularly practiced emergency procedures, including how to quickly disconnect from a fish if a large predator appeared. That's what makes stories like this so unsettling. Experience usually reduces risk, but it can never remove it entirely. The group spent the morning targeting mahi-mahi around the debris line, and the fishing was productive. Several fish had already been landed. Ravi was using a reel system attached to his gear, a common setup among experienced spearfishers. The system allowed him to fight powerful fish without immediately letting go of the spear.
Not far from the area, a tiger shark was moving through the open water. Tiger sharks are large, opportunistic predators known for investigating wounded or struggling prey.
For spearfishers, a fish fighting on a line can sometimes attract unwanted attention. Everything changed when Ravi speared a large mahi-mahi at around 30 feet deep. The fish was badly wounded but remained strong, thrashing and pulling hard against the line. As Ravi began ascending, the fish continued struggling below him. At some point during the fight, a tiger shark was drawn toward the commotion. The shark closed the distance and struck the mahi-mahi. The force of the impact snapped the reel line tight. Ravi immediately recognized the danger and reached for his knife to disconnect from the setup. Before he could free himself, the shark struck again. Witnesses later described seeing Ravi suddenly pull downward as the fish and shark fought below him. Investigators believed that during the chaos, a loop of line wrapped around part of his gear or body, preventing him from separating from the fish as quickly as intended. Instead of being able to release the catch and move away, Ravi was pulled directly into the struggle. The sudden force left him disoriented underwater. As he fought the tangled line, precious seconds passed. The entanglement kept him submerged longer than expected, and during the struggle he inhaled water. His friends reacted immediately. They reached him within moments, pulled him free, and brought him aboard the boat. Emergency aid began right away as they headed back toward shore. They did everything they could to keep him alive, but Ravi never regained consciousness.
Medical findings later determined that drowning was the primary cause of death, with injuries sustained during the entanglement contributing to the outcome.
In the weeks that followed, investigators examined the equipment and reconstructed the sequence of events. Their conclusion was sobering. The shark had not targeted Ravi, it had targeted the fish. The tragedy resulted from the brief but critical period during which Ravi remained connected to a wounded catch while a large predator was feeding on it. The loss hit the spearfishing community hard, because when people hear about accidents involving beginners, it's easy to point to obvious mistakes. Cases like this are different. Ravi knew the risks, understood the procedures, and still found himself in a situation that unraveled in seconds. Many divers revisited their own emergency plans afterward, asking themselves whether they could react quickly enough if faced with the same circumstances. For his friends, the memory that remained wasn't of the shark. It was of a skilled outdoorsman doing something he loved, caught in a chain of events that moved faster than anyone could stop. Ravi was pulled underwater by a connection he couldn't break in time. But sometimes the ocean doesn't need a shark or a tangled line to claim a diver. Sometimes the danger comes from pushing just a little farther than the body can handle. Our next story takes us to the reefs off Australia, where a veteran freediver with years of experience went down for what should have been a routine dive and never came back up. Ravi's tragedy unfolded because a situation he understood unraveled faster than he could react. The final story follows another experienced waterman whose greatest threat wasn't the one people would expect. It was May 14th, 2022, off the coast of Cairns, in Queensland, Australia. The water was clear, the sea was calm, and conditions were ideal for a day of spearfishing on the reef. A 47-year-old marine mechanic named Lorenz Moyle was out there with a longtime dive partner, doing something he had spent more than 15 years mastering. Lorenz loved the ocean. Friends described him as skilled, careful, and experienced. Over the years, he had completed countless dives in similar conditions without incident. That morning had gone well. He and his partner had already spent hours in the water, making repeated dives and landing several fish. By the afternoon, they had a successful catch and every reason to head home satisfied. Repeated breath-hold diving places a heavy demand on the body. Every deep descent uses oxygen, and divers need adequate time at the surface to recover before going down again. As the day went on, both men began feeling the effects of hours spent diving. Lorenz's partner suggested wrapping things up soon, but Lorenz wanted one final descent. He still felt capable, and after years of experience, there was little reason to believe this dive would be any different from the dozens he had already completed that day.
That's one of the hardest lessons in freediving. Experience can reduce risk, but it can never eliminate it. The body's limits don't always announce themselves before they're reached.
Before continuing, it's worth talking about the tiger shark that would later appear in the story. Tiger sharks are large predators commonly found in tropical and subtropical waters, including parts of the Great Barrier Reef. They're known for investigating potential food sources and are often drawn to fishing activity. But despite what you might assume, the shark was not responsible for what happened to Lorenz. On what would become his final dive, Lorenz descended to roughly 60 feet and speared a coral trout near the reef. After securing the fish, he began swimming back toward the surface. Everything appeared normal, but during the final part of his ascent, only about 10 feet below the surface, disaster struck. After a day of repeated deep dives, combined with limited recovery time between descents, Lorenz experienced a shallow water blackout. The condition occurs when oxygen levels in the brain drop too low during the final stage of a breath hold dive. One moment he was ascending, the next he lost consciousness. Because of the weight he was carrying for the dive, his unconscious body began sinking again. The speared fish remained attached and continued struggling underwater. At the surface, Lorenz's partner wasn't immediately alarmed. The two had spent years diving together, and after hours in the water, routines had become familiar. For a brief moment, he was occupied managing gear and watching the surrounding area. By the time he realized Lorenz should have surfaced already, valuable seconds had passed. He immediately dove down to investigate. When he found Lorenz below him, he quickly brought him back to the surface and began rescue efforts. Around the same time, a tiger shark that had likely already been investigating the area moved closer to the struggling fish. The shark's presence would later become part of the story, but it arrived after the critical event had already occurred. Lorenz was brought back to the boat, where CPR began immediately. Emergency responders later met the vessel and continued resuscitation efforts. Despite everyone's efforts, he could not be revived. The investigation that followed found no evidence of a shark attack, equipment failure, or medical emergency unrelated to diving. Authorities concluded that Lorenz had suffered a shallow water blackout during the final stage of his ascent and subsequently drowned. Investigators believe the risk was likely increased by the cumulative effects of repeated breath-hold dives, insufficient recovery between descents, and the physical fatigue that had built up throughout the day. The loss hit the local diving community hard. Lorenz wasn't a reckless beginner ignoring basic safety advice. He was exactly the type of diver people expect to return safely at the end of the day. And that's why stories like this stay with people. They remind us that some of the most dangerous hazards in the ocean aren't dramatic at all. Sometimes they're silent, invisible, and impossible to see until it's too late.
Lorenz's story ends here, but the lesson remains. In freediving, the greatest threat isn't the shark nearby. It's the threat of fatigue that takes everything without warning.
The ocean doesn't always announce its dangers. Sometimes it waits until the very last few feet from safety.